Welcome to the 2021 Volkswagen Golf R. It's got 316 brake horsepower, all-wheel drive, a big boot, PCP deals aplenty, and it won't leave you weeping every time you take it in for an oil change. VW literally sold thousands of the Mark 7 version, and at times it was even more popular than the cheaper Golf GTI. So obviously they want to repeat that success with this, the Mark 8. Trouble is, in the meantime, other manufacturers have caught wind of the success of the Golf R and they've come up with their own 2-litre, 300 brake horsepower, all-wheel drive mega hatches in the shape of the Mercedes-AMG A35 and the BMW M135i. Question is, which one should you buy?
Now the answer to that question is mainly going to lie in what the cars are like to drive. That goes without saying. But because they're hot hatchbacks, they also need to work in a way that's compatible with the daily grind. So we're going to start with what they're like to sit in.
So starting with the M135i, and I've climbed in here, and honestly, I really am not sure that I'm in the M135i because this just feels like an M Sport. There's barely any differences at all. I mean, the seats, I reckon, are the biggest giveaway, but other than that, there's just nothing to suggest that you're in the top of the range 1 Series. But then that's probably not a bad thing because out of all of these standard cars, I reckon the 1 Series has got the nicest cabin. Infotainment-wise, you've got the BMW Live Cockpit Professional, which is actually standard on all 1 Series. So there's the touchscreen infotainment screen, which is also controlled by a dial down here, which is really nice. You've got a second option there. And also the digital dashboard display that I've said in the past, they're not as customizable as, for example, Mercedes or Audi, but they are very clear, which is nice because BMW M cars have always had nice clear dials, so that carries that on. We've also got lots of physical buttons down here, a whole bank of them. So there's the shortcut buttons for your radio and for your navigation. There's the heating controls. All of that can be done super quickly. So if you don't like touchscreens, this probably is one of the best ones to get in this sector. Seating position, well, this seat itself is really nice and comfortable and it's got good support from the bolsters as well. I could do with being a little bit lower down, but that's pretty much the case in all hot hatches, and this is by far not the worst offender for that. The steering wheel is typical of a BMW steering wheel, so it's a bit too thick, a bit too chunky. I prefer the slimmer ones because you get a nicer feel through them. And also, owing to this being pretty much the same as an M Sport 1 Series, you don't get the M1 and M2 shortcut buttons like you do on full fat M cars. It's the same kind of bank of switches down here, which is fine, but it would be nice just to have that little red button up there to make it feel sportier and give you quicker access to your favorite driving modes. But other than that, this is a really nice interior. It feels properly grown up. It could just do a little bit more flair though. So getting out of the BMW and into the AMG A35, and it's like polar opposites because this just really grabs you as soon as you get in. It's definitely got that wow factor. I mean, there's the 64 color ambient lighting, which you can't really see in the day, but at night it looks incredible. And then there's these turbine style vents. It's like you're in a business class lounge at a nice modern airport. It really does grab your attention. But also, unlike the BMW, the build quality isn't much to write home about because while there are some cheaper materials, that's not end of the world. The bit that does bother me is that things start creaking, and that's even more evident when you go around corners quickly or you start going over bumps, and it just doesn't quite stand up to close scrutiny or feel as solid as the BMW. These two screens up here dominate the cabin, and if you want to have them so that they're both 10.25 inches, which you do because otherwise you get some quite ugly black bars surrounding them, you need to pay an extra £2,000 to get this digital instrument cluster in full size, which is actually a little bit disappointing considering how much this car costs on its base price. The driving position in this is definitely, or it feels like it's definitely the highest one out of all three cars. I'd like it to go considerably lower. And these seats, they don't hold you in on the sides quite as well as they do on the BMW. What I do like about this driving position, or at least the steering wheel, is that you've got these drive mode toggles down here, so you can easily go between your favorite modes, and you can also customize them with the button here. So that's for the gearbox, whether it's manual or auto, and it's just a really easy way to change things around rather than going into the menu system or using the buttons down here like you do on the BMW. So yeah, cabin on the A35 really grabs your attention. This will be a big selling point for a lot of people, but just bear in mind that it isn't quite as well built or as good a driving position as you get on the BMW, or maybe as we're about to find out on the Golf. Last but not least, VW Golf R interior. It's the newest car here, and first impressions of the cabin are that I'm a bit disappointed, because the BMW's got that nice understated appeal to it. The Mercedes-AMG really grabs your attention straight from the off. This, it just feels a bit bland and generic because there's no real kind of design to it. There's nothing that really draws your eyes and you look at and you think, yeah, I really like that. I mean, down here by the gear selector, it's all pretty plain. It's almost like they've had their eye on other things when they designed this interior. Probably the new electric ID3 and the ID4, because you know that Volkswagen can do better than this when it comes to design, but it just isn't apparent on this interior. Better points about it, well, the build quality, it's up there with the BMW, I'd say. It feels solid. There's none of that creakiness that there is in the Mercedes-Benz. And these dual displays, again, there's not much design in them, but you've got a 10-inch central infotainment screen. There's a 10-inch digital dashboard display. And there's been a bit of controversy about this because obviously the physical controls have gone. It's mostly touchscreen, but I don't think it's too bad at all. You've still got the sliders, which are down here below it, and it's really, really responsive as well. It feels almost like an iPad, so I can't complain about that. Driving position, pretty much as it is in the other two cars. You're sitting just a bit too high. It feels a little bit awkward. I guess the pedals are a bit offset as well, and that comes when you're driving it quickly, you're having fun with it. But on a normal drive, comfort setting, yeah, seats are comfortable, nice and supportive, no real complaints there.
The easiest way to sum up the cabins of these three cars is that the AMG and BMW can both count their respective interiors as selling points for contrasting reasons. Meanwhile, sitting in the Golf, it's clear that while the cabin isn't a reason to put you off the car, it's certainly not one to pull you in either. Hence why I ended up getting straight back in the BMW and AMG when it came to working out which is the best to drive.
Right, I'm back in the BMW M135i, and honestly, I've got it in comfort mode with the softest setting on the optional adaptive dampers, and again, you'd struggle to tell that this is the hot hatch version of the 1 Series because it's the paragon of civility in here. It's so grown up and civilized. The engine is the B48 2-litre twin-scroll turbo BMW power unit, which actually is the most powerful variant of that particular engine that they make. It's got 302 brake horsepower, 332 pounds-foot of torque, 0 to 62 miles an hour, 4.8 seconds, and top speed, as usual, limited to 155 miles an hour. Two things I notice about this engine, and the first is how smooth and linear and even the power delivery is, but also how it's got more torque than the other two cars, and how it comes in lower down the rev range. So it's available from around 1750 RPM, and it means that the engine feels a lot meatier low down. There's not as much of a pause as there is in the other two cars. It just picks up and goes, and then it just blends seamlessly into a wave of power above 4,000 RPM, where in third and fourth gear it just pulls like a train. You look down at the speedometer and you just realise how much speed you're gaining. And this is a seriously quick car. The 0 to 62 time, I think, is a bit misleading, because it's only once it gets into its stride and you get that in-gear performance that then revs out at higher speeds that you really feel all the power that's on offer. I've got to say though that it's never going to sound as good as the 3-litre straight sixes that came before it, but I think BMW could have put a bit more effort into giving this engine more character in how it sounds and also just how it feels, because it does its job, no doubts about that. It powers this car along very, very well indeed, but there's not much kind of drama to how it sounds or just how it picks up the pace. It's almost too efficient and too clinical almost. When it comes to handling, I think there's a genuine case for the regular 1 Series being one of the best driving hatchbacks out there. So they've got a really good platform to work from with this. And they've also added some extra hardware. So there's bigger anti-roll bars. You've got extra bracing front and rear. They've changed the power steering, so it's got a nice quicker feel to it. And also, there's a Torsen limited slip front differential. And together with the ARB control, which is taken straight off the BMW i3 electric car, and the yaw control, the result is a car that feels like the front end is doing all the work, and the driven rear wheels are there just to help that Torsen diff pull you and push you out of corners, because you can take huge amounts of speed in and then just let the front sort itself out and the back will follow. I mean, I guess the big takeaway is that this BMW hot hatch feels very front wheel drive in its characteristics, and you'd think that, yeah, of course it's got X-Drive, but there'd be some kind of nod to, you know, the rear wheel drive heritage, but honestly there isn't. It feels the complete opposite to that. It's also worth pointing out that this car is the heaviest of the three, and you can't always feel that, but it is in slower speed, quite tight corners where it feels just a little bit top heavier than the other two. I'm not quite sure where the center of gravity is compared to the Golf and the AMG, but you do just subtly notice it. Also, gearbox. I said this car is super civilized, and it is. And it almost feels like in the programming for the sport mode for the gearbox, they've tried to kind of remedy that and add a little bit of excitement by giving you a kick in the back when you change up. But it's completely over-exaggerated, because if we drop down to second gear now, put my foot down, go to third, it's just a giant kick in the back, and it feels like it comes a little bit too late as well, so it's artificially engineered in. It just doesn't fit in with the rest of the car. I mean, in the crazy Merc maybe, but in this, yeah, doesn't quite feel right. We'll switch to the AMG in a second, but I think the takeaway with this is that this is, as I said, a very grown-up hot hatch, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is a place in the market for that, and it does have its own character as a result, but it doesn't feel like a BMW hot hatch. And I know it's not rear-wheel drive anymore, and that's got a lot to do with it, but there's definitely a place for a hatchback that feels like a BMW performance car, and as good as this thing is, I'm not sure it does. It's just not very BMW. Okay, so I've just got out of the BMW and got into the AMG A35, and it is completely different in its approach, because I've got everything in comfort mode, including the optional adaptive dampers, which you can only get as part of the £6,000 AMG Premium Plus pack, so you really pay for them. But even so, it just feels like this car wants to be on a racing track, or at least a completely smooth piece of road, and the imperfections in the road are just not really its thing, because the ride is, well, it's firm, really firm, even in comfort mode, and the road noise at motorway speeds is pretty colossal. But then when you read about the changes they've made to this car over the standard A-Class, that stiffness, it all makes sense, because it's got AMG springs, it's got AMG anti-roll bars, it's got a solid mounted subframe, and the wishbone joints on the front, they are solid rather than being rubber bushes, so it's all there to make everything feel tauter and make the A35 feel like a racing car almost. The result is that when you do get a nice smooth piece of road and you can afford to toggle it into Sport or Sport Plus mode, then this is really good fun. There's no fancy differential on the front like you get in the BMW, or even on the back like you get on an A45S, but Mercedes reckons that this isn't that much slower through a corner than its bigger brother. You do have brake-based torque vectoring to rely on though, and together with the drive going 100% to the front in normal driving conditions and up to 50% to the rear wheels, this is a very neat and tidy car through the corners. Quite surprising actually well, if you've driven the A45S, you'll know that that thing can be a bit of a hooligan. It's not so interested. One thing that is vocal though is the exhaust. I mean, you can hear the pops and the crackles on the Overrun. It's far more entertaining than the BMW or on the Golf R. And a lot of that is synthesized in, but those pops and crackles, they are quite entertaining, definitely. I tell you what is also really impressive about this car, and it's the brake pedal. It's got such a brilliant amount of feel to it. And the brakes themselves are pretty damn good, but it's the feel that's really taking my attention, because you can just measure how much brakes you want going into a corner and just get the right amount of weight over the nose. Now you might think that because the engine in this is a 2-litre 4-cylinder petrol, it's a detuned version of what's in the A45, but actually it isn't. It's an upgraded version of what's in the A250. So it's got 302 brake horsepower, 295 pounds-foot of torque, and 0 to 62 miles an hour coming in 4.8 seconds. So it's completely comparable with the BMW. I also feel like I could do with a few more revs in this car, because peak power arrives lower than the Golf and the BMW. It's underneath 6,000 RPM, and once you hit that, you really think the engine's got into its stride, but then not much later you've got the red line at 6,500 RPM and it's time to change gear. And if you don't change gear, then you hit a very disappointing soft limiter, which really kills the mood. You know, this A35, it is good fun, especially on a nice road like this, but it asks you to give so much in return. It feels like an uncompromising car, and I'm not sure I could live with that every day. I won't be taking this one back on the motorway, that's for sure. Last but not least is the Golf R, and where the BMW felt like a very understated and grown-up hot hatch, and the Mercedes felt like the complete opposite of that, I reckon this Golf is going to be a balance somewhere between the two. That's what it feels like. The engine in this car is an evolution of the 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged EA888 unit that was in the previous Mark 7 Golf R, but this time it's got a bit more power, so 316 brake horsepower, which is up 20 on the previous model, and 310 pounds-foot of torque, meaning 0 to 62 miles an hour in 4.7 seconds and a top speed of 155 miles an hour. But you know what? I don't believe any of those figures, because this feels and is significantly quicker in a straight line than both the BMW and the A35. And you can do a breakdown of what that power feels like, because below 4,000, 3,500 RPM, it accelerates as you'd expect for a car with these kind of power and torque figures. That's not out of the ordinary. But once you get it above 4,000, it really, really starts to fly. I mean, you can feel yourself getting pinned back in your seat, and you can also see the numbers barely keeping up with themselves on the digital dash readout. It seriously gains speed at a proper rate. You've got peak power arriving later than any of the other cars, 6,600 RPM, and although there's not much incentive to get there because of the noise, which isn't much to write home about, just to see and feel that sense of speed in a Golf, that makes it worth it. Also, this DSG gearbox, it's the best DSG I think I've ever tried, because it does the everyday stuff really well. It also does up changes nicely, but then you'd expect that from a gearbox in a hot hatch. But it's the down changes which really impress me, because I'm doing about 44 miles an hour now, 5th gear, 1, 2, 3, down to 2nd. Every gear change individual, it didn't block change them, it just did them as I pulled the paddle. And honestly, there are gearboxes in sports cars twice the price of this that are not that good at down changes. Also, coming into corners, I think there's a misconception about how people think a Golf R handles. They don't think it's engaging, and this goes back to the Mark 7. And I also think it's the same sort of thing as you get with a Nissan GTR, because people probably who haven't driven one think that they're going to be super clinical and there's going to be no kind of emotion to driving them, and that's just not the case. They're completely different than that. And it's the same with this Golf R. I've got enough feel in the steering to let me know what's going on, more than in the BMW and in the Mercedes. The optional adaptive dampers in this car, well worth the money. They tread a really fine line between keeping the car balanced and stable, yet also allowing it to absorb bumps, mid-corner, corner entry, corner exit. It just shrugs them off in a way that the A35 especially, and to some degree the BMW as well, simply can't do. And that's pretty much regardless of which of the 3 settings you've got the dampers in. Also, with this Mark 8 version, they've stiffened the spring rates at the front, and they've also tweaked the camber as well, and that's certainly helped. But I think the biggest difference is that R performance torque vectoring at the back, because now not only can you split the power, or can the car split the power between the front and the rear wheels, it can also split the power between the left and right rear wheels. So going through a corner, it can overspeed the outside rear wheel, and then using the XDS software on the front, it can brake the diagonal front wheel, so it feels literally like the car is just pivoting its body through a corner. And if you get the right kind of corner, you can also get power oversteer, which you definitely couldn't get on the previous Golf R. No way. I mean, the end result is that this car feels like the most rear-driven of the 3, and the BMW, weirdly, feels like the most front-driven. I mean, everything's backwards. It's like doing a car review in Tenet. This is not how it's supposed to be. Do you know what I really like about how this car drives is that it is capable, like, you know, most modern 2-litre all-wheel drive hot hatches are, but it doesn't make a secret of how it's doing everything. You can feel what's going on underneath you, and you can understand how you've just gone through that corner at ridiculous speed. I mean, there's really not much I don't like about the driving experience. If I was going to nitpick, the drive modes are a slight issue, because in the race mode, you've got everything in its firmest setting, but you've also got the steering in its heaviest setting, which I think robs a layer of feel. So you think, I'll use the individual mode and take that down a notch, fine. But then when you go to the comfort setting on this car, it defaults to the eco engine mode, which kind of makes it feel a bit like you're driving through treacle sometimes. So again, you think, I'll use the individual mode to fix... you can't, because you've already set it up for your sporty mode, so you have to keep changing that, and that's not ideal. And something else actually, while the gearbox is brilliant, you have to get the performance pack if you want it to stay in manual mode and also not automatically change up when you hit the red line. And that's a tiny software thing, but you need to pay quite a big chunk extra to get it fixed, and that kind of grinds a little bit. But yeah, otherwise, I'm struggling to fault this thing to drive. I really am. I said when I started driving this that I thought it was going to be the perfect balance between the BMW and the Mercedes, and honestly, it's not far from that. I feel like Goldilocks, who's finally found her perfect porridge. The Golf R is just the right temperature.
Having driven the cars for several hours before and during this test, what I really liked about each of them is that although they're so similar on paper and the stats are almost identical, they all have a very different and sometimes unexpected take on the whole hot hatch experience.
If you want something super focused and that will draw attention, then the Mercedes-AMG will do that. If you want something subtler and more grown up, then the BMW M135i could be for you. But if you want what I reckon to be the best driving, and also cabin aside, the best all-rounder, and the one that I would spend my own money on without a second's thought, then the Golf R has got to be the one for you, and I think it's the winner of this test.